Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 16, Peoples of America. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at Section 1, and that is going to be dealing with North American societies. Throughout this lecture, we're going to go throughout the entirety of the continent itself, so we're going to be all over, anywhere from the southwest even all the way to the northeast. So let's get started and talk about the people of North America. All right, so let's set the stage for you guys. So setting the stage in history and how did people get to the Americas, and how they did that is about 40 to 12,000 years ago. Hunter-gatherers, they migrated from Asia across the Bering Strait land bridge into what is today Alaska, and then once they got across that land bridge into the Alaskan area, they slowly migrated and began to populate North America and then eventually Central America and South America. And because of this speed or lack thereof in terms of how fast this went, you are going to see many different diverse cultures develop across North, Central, and South America. And one of the key factors that plays a role into this diversity is the environments that these people come across, because there's a bunch of different varieties. If you just go back and actually look at the previous slide, you can see, you've got I know these are the breakups of the Native Americans, but different groups, but in general, they're following geographic guidelines here. All right, sorry. And you're going to see some very complex, sophisticated societies that, in many cases, develop long-distance trade networks and have very significant buildings and structures that they're able to construct in their society. So let's get started. All right, so let's start in the West. So in the Pacific Northwest, we see an area that's highly rich in resources, and those resources directly lead to a higher population. And we're going to see particularly very developed hunting techniques, both on land and by sea, from these groups of people in the Pacific Northwest, as they hunt whales, specifically in canoes, as you can see one on screen, and then they hunt things like deer and bears very effectively in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. One key cultural trait that you need to know from the people of the Northwest was the potlatch ceremony, which was a ceremony that was used to display rank and prosperity amongst those in those tribes. Now to move down to the south, so in the Southwest, this is a much different climate than what we see in the rainy, resource-rich Pacific Northwest. In the Southwest, we see a very harsh, desert-like climate. And one group of people, the Hohokam, they develop farming practices with irrigation techniques, which is important given the climate, but also as a technology or technological feat for these people. And they grow things like corn and beans and etc. We know that the pottery that we found from these people and the rituals that we can see from them show their contact with the Mesoamerican cultures that we're going to discuss in the later sections of this unit. All right, here on the map, guys, you can see the Hohokam. The Hohokam are right here, okay, in modern-day central southern Arizona, and then the other big ones are the Anasazi, which we're going to talk about a little bit here just a second, and the Mogollon here. All right, so the Anasazi, they lived in the Four Corners region, as you guys can see. Here's the Four Corners: Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. And they built cliff dwellings. One of the most famous ones is Mesa Verde, another one Chaco Canyon. And they built their dwellings in cliffs for protection. And you can see on the screen what I'm talking about. Very difficult to get to these places because they're up and raised into the cliff sides. And they combined to form pueblos, which these compounds were made of adobe. So pueblos are just adobe compounds. And we know from seeing these buildings and other things that we found from them, such as pottery and tools, that they were a society of very skilled laborers and builders. From a religious standpoint, they practiced what we know as animism, and that term goes with many cultures, but they had their ceremonies in these underground ceremonial chambers, which are known as kivas, and so forth. Now, we don't really know exactly the direct reasons for why these societies in the Southwest, such as the Anasazi, went away. We just know that there was an environmental factor in terms of drought. We don't know exactly what caused that drought, but we do know that they become abandoned, or they abandon these areas because of lack of water. And then this culture from the Anasazi and others are going to be carried on to the Pueblo people that are going to be named after their buildings. All right, so now we're going to move to a completely different area of the continent, so more towards the Midwest, kind of the Mississippi River, Ohio River area, and talk about the woodland cultures. And the woodland cultures, there's a couple examples here on screen. The Adena, they built burial mounds that they filled with gifts for the dead. You can see there at the top, not really unlike what we see within in the pyramids of Egypt, and in the gifts and stuff that were filled in those chambers for the pharaohs. The Hopewell people, they built even larger burial mounds and ceremonial mounds, and so forth. And you can see one here in southern Ohio that is actually representative, showing a snake, and that it stretches over a wide area. And then another group, the Mississippians, they were kind of probably the most sophisticated and largest of these groups in the woodland areas. And they built villages that were based on not only agriculture but extensive trade networks, with the largest city being Cahokia, which was regulated and led by priest rulers. So their rulers shared not only political but also religious level heights as well in their society. And here you guys can see an artistic representation or recreation of Cahokia at its height. You can see, again, kind of a similarity that we're going to see within some of the cultures we talk about here later on in the course, with these pyramid-type structures at the center of their cities. And again, you can make this connection again with like other societies that built pyramid-like structures, like the ancient Egyptians as well. All right, now we're going to move on to the Iroquois. The Iroquois are actually one of my favorites, given their role in American history. In the years before the American Revolution and in the American Revolution, but neither here nor there. The Iroquois, they live in the eastern part of the United States, or what is today the United States, as well as that part of Canada that's just opposite of New York. So think of the St. Lawrence River Valley and so forth. And in the Northeast, you had various cultures that were fighting over land, and ultimately what happened is the Iroquois came together. It was actually 5 and then ultimately 6 groups that had similar languages and cultural traditions that came together and formed an alliance based on their language. And they formed the Iroquois League, or the Iroquois Confederacy. And there's other names for it. But the 5 main ones were the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. And legend has it their famous leader, Hiawatha, is the one that created the league to promote defense and cooperation. We'll actually take a look at this, a little bit of this legend here in this class if we have some time. And then the Iroquois played a significant role in not only the American Revolution but in the French and Indian Wars, in their role in trying to play, when most of them actually allied themselves with the British against the Americans. And it was because they were trying to protect their homeland. Okay, another thing that they were known for, you guys can see in the bottom picture, is it's maybe a little bit difficult, but these structures right here, they lived in longhouses where many families would actually live together, and they worked together as a community. Here you guys can actually see the 6 nations of the Iroquois. You can see the Mohawk, the Oneida area, the Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. Those are the original 5. And then you also have Algonquin, the other Algonquin tribes in there as well. All right, so now we're going to talk about trade in general, but we'll kind of link it here a little bit to the Pacific Northwest in the Mississippian area. So trade is what tied the North American tribes together. And whether it was something that was very close to something that was more extensively far off, such as the Mississippians using the Mississippi River and the river systems around them to go to many different areas, depends on the geographic location of the society that we're talking about. I already talked about the Mississippians. They're able to use those rivers to get to the Rockies or get to the Gulf of Mexico or even get to the to the Atlantic seaboard in some cases, or even up to the Great Lakes. The Chinook here, you can see a map on the upper left-hand corner. They were in kind of the Oregon, Washington area. They used their position on the sea to trade all up and down the west coast of North America into what is today Canada and down the coast of what is today California. Here you can see that it says Hopewell interaction sphere. This is also basically the Mississippian interaction sphere as well. You can see the different cultures. Here's the Hopewell main area. Here's another area for the Hopewell, and so forth. All right, so now onto religion. Just a couple more slides here, by the way. The common thread, really, besides trade as a connecting point between the Native American societies, mainly North America, was religion. And it had to do with their beliefs more focused towards what we call animism. If you guys remember back we talked about in chapter 15, to more of a nature belief. They're pretty much the same thing. They're just dependent on which culture you're looking at and what their individual beliefs are. And they believed that the world was filled with spirits that were representative or from nature. Many believed in a supreme being or something that was called the Great Spirit. Again, the name of that spirit or being is dependent on who you're talking about specifically, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of these. Now, rituals and customs were what guided many of the North American groups' lives to help them maintain peace and harmony, not only as a group, but with others as well. And then one of the most important aspects of religion with their lives and how they lived them was how they treated their land and how they treated nature because of that connection. And there was a huge respect that North American tribes, as well as many others as well in different places around the world, had respect for their land because they viewed it as a source of life. It was something that was sacred. It could not be sold. It could not be bought. And this is going to come to be a problem later, as that's in direct conflict with the principles of European-based people they come in contact with. All right, last one here. We have social patterns. In a lot of cases, the family was the basic structure in pretty much all North American tribes or groups. This also could grow to include the extended family as well. Think of the Iroquois and the people living in those long houses together. And this helped because it allowed them to develop close loyalty and close bonds together. And then you actually had different clans that developed in different groups as well over time because of the structure that was in place. And then the totems were symbols. They could be small, they could be big. We can think of them in a lot of ways. The traditional totem pole, this is of a Pacific Northwest society that symbolized not only a group or clan, but can symbolize behaviors, symbolize spirits, and so forth, and signify relationships. And you can find these in masks, boats, poles, and so forth. Two really good examples on screen. And then we actually have the societies that we're talking about here. They vary depending on, the practices vary depending on their size. They could use some very basic ones if it was a small group to some that were very, very, extensive and even complicated or complex if we're dealing with a bigger society. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. I apologize if there was any background noise from some of the other classes around, and I'll see you in the next one.